Earlier today, special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation unveiled 13 separate indictments against Russian citizens who allegedly tried to meddle in the 2016 election. You're going to hear a massive amount of propaganda about those indictments and what they mean in coming days. So we've looked at them carefully, and here's what seems to be true about them. The indictments describe a Russian effort to, quote, sow discord in the American political system. This effort began in 2014. That was, of course, before Donald Trump or any other candidate had declared for the presidential race. The effort didn't seem to have a particular ideological agenda. The point was to stir up trouble. During the 2016 race, these 13 Russians allegedly ran Facebook ads and tried to organize events that criticized Hillary Clinton and supported Donald Trump. But the Russians also supported some left-wingers like Bernie Sanders and Black Lives Matter. Hillary Clinton was the front-runner for most of the race, and they wanted to yank her chain, and they did. But once the election was over, the Russians immediately started organizing rallies against Donald Trump. Rallies, though, is probably an overstatement. An anti-Muslim event, for example, allegedly organized by the Russians, drew a total of 4 RSVPs. An anti-Hillary event in New York got just 45. The only really successful event the Russians appeared to have pulled off seems to be an anti-Trump rally in New York City after the election right outside Trump Tower. Now, all of this is annoying. Obviously, they're foreigners, but none of it seems momentous. Here's what's not in the indictments: any evidence at all that any Russian behavior changed a single vote or did anything to sway the election in any direction. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein admitted as much today. Watch.
There is no allegation in this indictment that any American was a knowing participant in this illegal activity. There is no allegation in the indictment that the charged conduct altered the outcome of the 2016 election.
In a statement this afternoon, the White House even boasted about today's news. Quote, President Donald J. Trump has been fully briefed on this matter and is glad to see the special counsel's investigation further indicates that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And that's basically true. Close to 20 people have been indicted in this investigation so far. Still not a single piece of evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Putin. Collusion, you'll remember, was the reason we supposedly needed this multi-year, multi-million-dollar investigation in the first place, the one that has basically ground Washington to a halt and put your concerns on the back burner. And yet the evidence unearthed so far suggests precisely the opposite of collusion. Today's indictments say the Russians made contact with, quote, unwitting Trump supporters and campaign members. Now some journalists are scrambling to revise their previous claims. They're backing off collusion. Time columnist NYU professor Ian Bremmer tweeted this today, a ludicrous claim, quote, nobody plausible ever said there was a case for collusion. Really? Democrats in Congress have been saying that out loud for more than a year, very often live on this show, so that's a lie. But at least we know what our federal agents have been doing recently, why they were too busy to stop school shootings. They've been chasing down bad Facebook trolls. Today, the FBI admitted it was given explicit warning that Nicholas Cruz could be planning a massacre, but they never even followed up on that. If only someone had told them Cruz was talking to Vladimir Putin, they would have been on it, presumably. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley joins us tonight. Professor, Facebook trolls? I mean, I'm not for that, but I'm a little disappointed that that appears to be the sum total of this.
Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? I mean, you wonder whether Putin's back in Moscow watching the Women's March and saying, well, those 12 guys really did a lot. I mean, you didn't really have to send these guys to the United States to divide us politically. That was sort of a pre-existing condition. What's also amazing is how gratuitous this is. You know, that after the election, they start throwing protests on opposing sides. And it's just striking how little really could have been accomplished by this. But at the end of the day, the most interesting thing about this indictment is one adjective: unwitting. You know, after a year, after all these plea agreements, after all these interviews, they really don't have any evidence of anyone knowingly engaging with Russians, not even mentioning the Trump Tower meeting where they knew they were Russians. So there doesn't seem to be any there after a year.
So we're getting close to 20 indictments so far, and none of them speak directly to the underlying charges. I mean, their perjury, their money laundering, their failure to register as a foreign agent. I mean, I'm not saying they're insignificant, but they're skirting the edge of insignificant. Are we going to get actual charges against anybody, would you say?
Well, that is what's also striking about this. The charges themselves are actually quite conventional. Things like identity theft, which is very common with Russian sources, hacking. What isn't conventional, obviously, is the context. This is one of the largest indictments for trying to interfere with an election. It's just that the evidence of any success in that seems quite minimal. I mean, people have criticized Rod Rosenstein for saying there was no evidence of this impacting the election, but I think that what he was saying was we haven't really found anything quite significant in these activities. Now, having said that, we should be concerned about the hacking that went on. I think that was the most significant act.
Yes. I should say that we're watching the president and his wife in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Florida. They're down there in the aftermath, obviously, of the school shooting 2 days ago with police. If I could just wrap this up, Professor, is this kind of what we're going to see? I mean, and by the way, I'm not downplaying. It's offensive that foreign countries attempt to influence our elections. They influence our policy all the time. They're doing it now. I hate all of it. But do you think that we're going to get to a point where it becomes, we sort of give up looking for evidence of collusion between the campaign and the government?
Well, it would seem odd for this to go on much longer if they don't have any evidence they can cite in any of these indictments. This is just the last indictment.
Right.
So I think we'll all be looking to see whether he's going to bring some closure.
Okay. Carter Page advised the Trump campaign and was later monitored by the federal government, who treated him like a spy. He joins us tonight. Carter, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So just to get this out of the way at the outset, did you help any of these indicted Russians set up fake Facebook pages or plan any of their sparsely attended rallies for them?
The only Facebook shenanigans that were happening with state-sponsored media was Radio Free Europe. They published this fake news from the dodgy dossier in September 2016, and that was rebroadcasted by a sponsored media outlet, Radio Free Europe, which is sponsored by Broadcasting Board of Governors out of Washington. So that's the closest I ever had with any sort of government-sponsored news outlet. So no.
So you're an Annapolis graduate. You were a naval intelligence officer for 5 years. Presumably that marks you as a patriotic American. Did you ever imagine that your government would be spying on you at any point?
Well, I mean, I had some warnings about that back in starting in the summer of 2016 and into September. And actually, when I sent my letter to Director Comey on September 25th, 2016, I immediately called this out as a witch hunt. And so I had some advance warning about that. And I also warned him about, and I said, instead of allowing the staff of the FBI to focus limited resources on real threats, these desperate and unfounded calls for my investigation as a private citizen are a true disgrace. And unfortunately, as we saw this week down in Florida, that prediction turned out to be absolutely correct. So instead of focusing on some of these real threats out there, they were wasting a tremendous amount of money, time, and resources on this complete witch hunt.
And violating your civil liberties. Now, one of the reasons they were able to get a FISA warrant to break into your life and spy on you is because of the Steele dossier, which we reread last week, because why not? And in it, I'd forgotten that there was the allegation that you received a percentage of a Russian company, shares in that company, which would be worth about $11 billion. And so I guess the obvious question is, did you ever get $11 billion from the Russians for spying on the United States, for betraying your country?
I'm still waiting for that, Tucker. And actually, it's funny. The company that did end up acquiring those shares is Glencore, and that was founded by Mark Rich, who was pardoned by, in the last days of the Clinton administration. So they
on the
know
last day,
quite
I
a bit.
think,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
That's so. I mean, I don't want to get into a lot of pathos here. I don't even know you. I've never talked to you before tonight, but I've just been wondering as I watch you. Again, as an Annapolis graduate and a former naval officer, having your life destroyed by the U.S. government, like, what do you do for money, and how much has this cost you, and what has this done to your life? I keep thinking that.
Tucker, the last major intelligence failure by the U.S. intelligence community led to deaths of thousands of U.S. military officers and soldiers and airmen. So to me, this is a minor cost. And so I'm just thankful that this false intelligence that was put into the bloodstream of the U.S. government was not followed up on. And, President Trump was able to call this out for the complete lies and misinformation that it was.
Well, I'm sorry you never got the $11 billion in blood money that Steele claims you did. Carter Page, thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker. You too.